Hello, this is Holly Wharton from the Into the Woods podcast. And if you've followed the podcast at all over the last 9.5 years and 500 episodes, you will know that I really like talking about personal growth through outdoor adventures and also books because I'm a writer and I help other people publish their books. So I recently had a friend reach out to me about coming back on the show and to talk about his upcoming book. And I was very sad to say that the podcast is currently on pause. So I thought we'd try something different and do a video here on YouTube, doing the same kind of format as I used to do on the Into the Woods podcast, but video format. So this is a total experiment. And here we are. Let me know what you think in the comments. And there may be more content like this in the future. There may not. Who knows? We shall see. But in this episode, is it an episode? I don't know. In this experiment, we will be talking about the Camino de Santiago. We'll be talking about writing about your adventures. We'll be talking about writing nonfiction books and fiction books about your adventures and the whole creative process and combining adventure and creativity. So I hope you find this experiment interesting and useful. Let me know what you think. Thanks. Hey, Steve, how are you doing today?
I'm very well, thanks. Yeah.
Long time no see.
Well, yes, about 3 days.
We went on a walk last weekend for anyone who's watching this.
But we didn't have snow then, did we? And there's been the sprinkling of snow this morning here in the southeast.
I love snow. I'm always excited about snow. So why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do? So anyone watching this who has listened to the podcast might know you from episode 354, where we talked about the life-changing magic of walking a long-distance trail. So who are you?
So, yes, I'm Stephen Marriott. You might say former stockbroker, investment analyst turned writer, independently published. I've now written 3 books in the Reluctant Pilgrim series. The backdrop to that series is the Camino de Santiago and its various routes, different pilgrimages, which take you on a pilgrimage to the city of Santiago de Compostela in northwest Spain, Galicia, fictional stories that were inspired by that walk. And since writing the first book, Candyfloss Guitar, which is a novella, I've now come to the end of that trilogy, about to publish at the end of the month the final book, Diego's Guitar. And yeah, since the second book, I've based on the success of that, and as my skill as a writer has developed, I've had the confidence to leave the corporate world, commit to being a full-time author. You might say part-time traveler because I travel quite a lot in between, and obviously sometimes I work on my writing and books whilst I'm away in foreign places. Yeah, so that's me in a, I want to say nutshell, but I was quite long-winded about that, I think.
No, that was perfect. So this all started with the Camino, and you're a big fan of the Camino de Santiago.
Yeah.
I think most people probably know what that is, so I won't ask you what it is, but basically it's a pilgrimage in the north of Spain, coming from different places around the world. But there are many different versions of the Camino, and you've walked more than one version of it. So which versions have you experienced?
Okay, so there's the most, for people who don't know much about the Camino de Santiago, there is the most well-known Camino is known as the Camino Frances, because it starts in France, on the French side of the Pyrenees, and then you in a small sort of alpine town called Saint-Jean-de-Pied-de-Port. So that's the classic route, you might say, which starts there. But after day one, you're in Spain because you climb across the Pyrenees, and then you basically turn west. And for the next month or so, or 4 or 5 weeks, depending how fast you walk, around 800 kilometers later, after crossing through several regions of northern Spain, you will eventually arrive in the city of Santiago de Compostela, where the remains of Saint James the Apostle are buried at the cathedral. So it's a pilgrimage which It has religious and historical roots, but people walk it for lots of different reasons now, not just religious. And I didn't walk it necessarily for religious reasons um, during a sort of a time of change for me. But so that's the classic route. And there are many different ways, you might say, to Santiago, because it has its, as I say, its origins are a religious pilgrimage. People don't all live in Saint Jean de Pied de Port at the start of the classical route, but that was a gathering point across the Pyrenees. So depending on where you live, whether and it's typically northern Europe, because it's a Catholic, let's say historically a Catholic pilgrimage. There's different routes through France, for example, different routes through Spain, depending where in Spain you lived. And so I have done that classic route, and then I've done what's known as the Portuguese Camino. So in the Iberia region, but that's the Camino which takes you from Portugal, typically starting in Lisbon, then to Porto, then north up into Galicia. So another way up to Santiago de Compostela, and I've done that one from Porto, which is about 200 kilometers or so, I think. I forget now exactly. There's another Camino, a sort of a bonus Camino, you might say, for those of people who don't want to stop walking. When you get to Santiago, you can continue. For some people, want to continue to the coast. So that's the Camino Finisterre, Finisterre, the end of the world. Which is known as, because you can't go any further, and sort of before Christopher Columbus and times like that was deemed the edge of the world, the end of the world. So that is a sort of 3 to 4 day additional hike, which I also did on my first Camino when I reached after the Camino Frances. And then, as I say, there were several others across Spain, all generally sort of getting close or intersecting the traditional Camino de Frances. And I've walked one called the Mozarabe, and I don't like to shout from the rooftop about this one because it's infrequently walked. It's not as commercial as the others, which are the more traditional routes. That said, I have featured it in my second book, at Santiago's Guitar. So when I say not shouting from the rooftops, but I just I guess it's a Camino. So this one is the Mozarabe. Mozarabe relates to the name that the Muslim Catholics were known as when you go back to the Moors and
Muslim Spaniards.
Yes. Yeah, but they were Catholic, still Christians, and wanted to go on a pilgrimage. But I mean, they were in occupied. They were Catholics, Christians, and in occupied Spain when it was ruled by the Moors. And so their route was to walk from the Mediterranean route. And I walked it from a city called Almeria, which is southeasternly, near the only desert in Europe called the Cabo de Gato. And so I walked that one. I didn't walk it all the way, but basically from Almeria, Cordoba, Almeria, Granada, Cordoba. That one is about a 200-kilometer one, and then it takes you up to what's known as the Via Plata, which is sort of like a sort of spinal route up through Spain, which eventually hits the Camino Frances. So this is, I say, lesser walk one. Only about 250 people walk it a year, and I can imagine that might have been how the Camino. I mean, the Camino had a bit of rebirth in the late 80s, and I think this Camino, whilst it's now signposted, it's very sparse, as I suggested, in terms of pilgrims and walkers, and it's very rural in Spain there. And so that was a pretty epic experience in so many different ways.
Nice. So why the Camino? What do you like so much about it? Why have you explored different avenues of the Camino?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Why the Camino? I think the Camino has a sort of habit of sort of getting inside you. and there's a thing called, some people call it Caminoitis,
Mm,
that they get addicted because there's so many different Camino routes, and it's not I wouldn't call it a hardcore, like sort of through walking and through
mm,
hiking, um, because along the most well-known ones, such as the Camino Frances, there's an economy along there. There are hostels,
mm,
places to stay, whether it's in private accommodation or a municipal accommodation. And so I think for some people, once they've walked one, it's a nice experience. It's cultural. Not to say that there aren't difficult stretches or tough stretches, and
mm,
Spain's a pretty mountainous country, so there's always going to be hills and ridges and mountains to climb.
mm.
But I think, but what I'm trying to say is, I think once you've done one, um, you're curious as to where that another route to Santiago.
Yeah.
And I think it has to. I mean, it is a spiritual. It is a spiritual walk,
Mm,
um, and it reached out to me. You might say, kind of, the Camino whispered to me when I was at a time of crisis in my life. And I think as it has as a pilgrimage, people are looking for something. They're
yeah.
seekers, and they're hoping that the journey, the pilgrimage, um, um, might just help them work a few things out. And the big hope is that by the time you reach Santiago, um, 4 or 5 weeks later, if you do the traditional Camino Frances, maybe you'll have some answers. Um, so yeah, so for me, I was looking for answers. I was a bit lost, and the Camino just, yeah, kind of in a mysterious way, as it seems to do. It reached out to me.
Mm, yeah. It has like this kind of magic and mystique around it. I know I first read about it back in the mid 90s, and it's like been in my head ever since, kind of in the back
And
of my mind is
yes.
like this thing I want to do.
So when are you going to do it? I know you've done a lot of walking in the UK, and
Yeah.
you're an expert on several, sort of the North and South Downs, for example. But
Mm,
how did you hear about it? Go on. And I'm curious. I'm curious actually when you're going to do it. And but slightly tongue in cheek, because I think it's I think for many people you just know when it's right,
yeah.
and the time's right.
Yeah. So I first heard about it by reading Paulo Coelho's book back in 1996. And that was when I was like, oh my God, this sounds amazing. I
Yeah,
must do this.
the
And then I
pilgrimage, the book.
never did
Yes,
it.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And there have been times where I've put it in my calendar and then it didn't happen. And then I was going to do the Camino Português in March of 2020. And we all know what happened then.
Yes, yes, yeah.
So that was canceled. And then, talking to a friend of mine and really reflecting on the kind of experience I like to have, which is kind of being alone in nature, being
Mm,
alone on these journeys, I
yeah.
started to really question whether or not the Camino is right for me, because I really don't want to be surrounded by people.
Mm,
But then I was talking to our mutual friend, Susan Jagannath, on the podcast about the Camino, the Winter Camino. And
okay.
she's got a book coming out on the Winter Camino.
Yes.
And that's something that has made me think maybe that's a good thing, because I know
Mm,
there are fewer facilities open, a lot of things are closed in the winter,
yes.
but I think that might be my Camino. I don't know. I have
Wow.
another friend that's done it as well, and it's kind of also been on the back of my mind.
So this is the Camino Frances, but walking it out of season in the
Yes.
winter. Yeah, I mean, I've
Yes.
heard. I might better put you in touch with one or two people that have
Okay.
done that, or certainly another mutual friend, Adam.
Yes.
Adam Wells, he knows people that have walked it out of season. Yeah, I
Yeah.
could see you doing that, especially as you're getting quite excited before we are talking offline about the snow today.
Yes. I love snow. I used to live in Patagonia in southern Argentina, and I miss the snow. I miss like waking up and
Yes.
seeing snow every
Yeah.
morning in the winter. And when it snows here, I get so excited. So,
Mm,
I know that's a whole different type of adventure.
yeah.
But it's very appealing to me.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's the doing it out of season, then sort of coming up to winter. Um, so there will be practicality
Yes.
differences. But obviously there are the lesser walk caminos. I mean, the
Yeah.
Portuguese is still pretty popular,
Yeah.
although it's about a tenth, I think, in terms of the amount of people that walk it each year
Mm,
compared to the Universe. I mean, there's the one, the Mozarabi, which I touched on,
yes.
250. I only saw two other pilgrims on that
Nice.
walk. two cyclists who were in a distance and just sort of looked at me sort of as they cycled past. Sort of, I was having a break, and so they were actually on. I was off the Camino back. They just kind of looked at me and just sort of shouted in, bewilderment, "Oh, buen Camino!" Because obviously they
Nice.
didn't see many people. So
Yeah.
that that could be another one, or some of the less
Mm.
other ones which I don't know so much about, less
Mm.
ones. But I think the Camino France says. It'll be interesting to see if you know how your experience might be if you did that
Yeah.
in the winter.
Yeah.
And of course, you want to, which I'm glad to hear. I mean, everyone's Camino is different, and they should all
Yeah.
do it how they want to do it. You want to do it as a solo walker.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I've talked about this 1,000 times with Adam because,
yeah.
he knows that I've been wanting to do this for years. And at first I was thinking, oh, well, maybe I'll do a silent Camino and not speak to anyone. And then I was like, that, I mean, I know some people do that, and I know
Yeah,
some people do that for charity, and I think that's fantastic. But then I thought, oh, that might be awkward. I don't know. Like maybe that's just like trying too hard to be alone.
I think you've got to set out in the sort of with how you sort of want to do something, but I think not be too sort of,
Yeah,
for lack of a
rigid.
better term, rigid and pious on oneself. Because the Camino experience, or at least for me, I didn't know so much about it when I did it. It's just taking that first step, and then
Yeah.
before you know it, it's a day later, and things have evolved. And walking it's going to be very hard. I mean, if you do it out of season, I think there's even more camaraderie because you'll
Yeah.
meet other solo walkers. It's
Yeah.
going to be harsh conditions at some times. Some alberg, there'll only be maybe one albergue open, or
Mm.
a few private hotels and things like that. So you're likely to sort of be a small group that would probably come together and stay at
Mm.
some of the similar locations.
Yeah.
But I think my experience of the Camino, I started it on my own,
Yeah.
but I was rarely on my own
Yeah.
because I met other individuals who was in a similar situation, and we grouped up together. But we also everybody respects that it's your way of your
Mm.
experience, your own walk.
Yeah.
So you would walk on your own when you want to, and everybody's
Yeah.
respectful of that. You can walk it in a group with some friends you've made.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think you have to make it what you want. But
Yeah.
I'm just yes, but I'm very. I know you're going to walk it one day, so I'm very curious. You said you've been talking about it for a while, and
It will happen.
yeah, yeah. And I guess the big question more for you is whether you bring a tent and whether you do it that way.
Yeah, do you know, every time I've read so many books on the Camino.
Mm,
I belong to all the online communities about the Camino, like the forums and stuff. I
mm,
read all the stuff.
mm.
And anytime anyone says I want to bring a tent and camp on the Camino, everyone says don't do it because there are no camping sites. There are no places to camp. Like you're not allowed to wild camp. Like don't. So,
You can wild camp because
oh, can
I've
you?
met some people that've done it,
Okay.
but it's not really frowned upon, but it's just there aren't actual formal campsites,
Oh, that's
because
fine.
they're not really required because most people,
Yeah.
use the municipal
Albergas.
albergues and things. And I think I met two young guys from Croatia, and I
Mm.
stayed in their. It was a three-man tent, and
Mm.
I stayed in their tent a couple of
Wow.
nights. No, one night, sorry, in the woods. On the
Nice.
Camino Frances, and what they did is that they would alternate it. They would sort of wild camp for
Yeah.
one night, and then they would stay in an albergue another night, and
Mm.
to shower and
Mm.
to rest in a bed, and they just alternated it. So
That's nice.
I thought that was a really nice way of doing it because they just went with how they felt at the time,
Yeah.
and I think they always found somewhere. And funny enough, when we went into the woods and camped, sure enough, there were a couple other people that you came that night, pilgrims, who were doing the
Mm.
same thing.
Nice.
Yeah, so yeah, and I think it is really, I think we can overplan. This is not like some sort of wild hike or through hiking.
Yeah.
Yes, the Mozarabe I did was very rural and quite wild at times. So that's another story. But the well trodden ones, um, you don't need to plan so much, especially somebody like yourself who is experienced walker.
Mm.
You're not going to have to worry about the fitness so much. It's just making sure you've got the right gear really in terms of
Mm.
backpack, footwear, etc. But it really is. It's also putting faith into the journey and
Yeah.
faith into yourself to be resourceful and approach the unexpected.
Yes.
And you learn within a day or two. You're like,
Yeah.
this is how it works. This is the
Yeah.
routine.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, so yes, it's watch this space of you then still, isn't it?
Yes, yes, it is. Who knows?
Yeah.
Sometime it will happen. So
Yeah.
my big question for you is, why did you decide to write a series of novels about the
Mm.
Camino rather than doing a travel memoir or a travel log of your own experiences?
Sure, that's a good question because yeah, most people books related to Camino are non-fiction.
Yeah.
And not surprisingly, I think a lot of people walk it and are very inspired by the experience, their
Mm,
journey, and want to share that with others. For me, I never set out to write a book.
mm,
I never set out to be an author. Um, so if we go back now, this is quite a long time ago. So just over 10 years ago, when I first walked the Camino Frances in 2012, summer
mm,
2012, I was at a crossroads in my life. My marriage was coming to an end, and that was unexpected. Um, I was, how would I put it, questioning my career,
mm,
which was in financial services, as I mentioned, stockbroking
mm.
industry. Um, and I'd had some time out before and returned to the same industry, and was not feeling particularly satisfied
Mm,
still. About to turn 40,
mm,
and all these things coming together, and lost in life, you might say.
yeah.
And so, um, as I say, I never. It was more of a case of I need some ideas. I need to get away. I just I've done traveling before, so um, it was seen to be the obvious thing. But I didn't say, okay, I'm going to walk the Camino, and now I'm going to write a travel memoir, and it's going to be a bestseller, etc. It was more of a case of that. I like I went on the Camino, um, looking for some answers. Lost of answers back at home in London, but I do travel journal. And I have a notebook. I have a journal because I've backpacked before around South America, etc., and used to write emails back to my work colleagues, and so it was natural to have a journal with me. Plus, I've just got a really awful memory, as you know, for names. So it's just as well I write things down at the end of the
Yeah.
day, and it gives a bit more meaning and a bit more purpose that you record things and put them in your journal. So I had an amazing experience. I journaled, and I think as I journaled and started to get more comfortable with the distance, it's a bit overwhelming thinking, gosh, I've got to walk 800 kilometers across the country. A lot of people march off really fast, sort of
Mm,
panicking, thinking, you know, I've got to walk fast because it's such a distance. And you realize that as long as you're not you don't have a deadline, at the end of it, as in a flight or home or something,
mm,
which I didn't have, I
good.
could slow down. And as I
Yeah.
began to slow down and start to observe, I started to observe. I think my um, notebook became richer because of
Mm,
that. The
interesting.
experiences I was having, I could reflect on them better and put in my notebook. So, long story short, um, that notebook um, actually did morph into what traditionally people do, is that it turned into a blog. So it was
Mm,
it was a non-fiction experience. I was, at the end of the Camino, I had, such an amazing time. I was also very intrigued about the history of the Camino
mm,
and its historical roots as well. And I just thought, I'm going to set up a blog for the first time I ever set up a blog.
mm,
Um, and just to share my experience and I don't think just to reflect on it and get some meaning and share that. But that was my first experience of writing about the Camino.
mhm,
But I think the people and experiences I had just started to, and my imagination
mm,
morphed into a character called Diego, who's a flamenco guitarist. And there was a Mexican guy, a very young guy in his early 20s. I think he had sort of uh, he wasn't able to make much choices, I think, in his life back home. He was very much pushed down a certain route of education and things. But he was on the Camino, and he brought his guitar with him, and he was a part of our group some of the times, and he
mm,
was not busking as such, which
mm,
my character does along the Camino because he's forced to because he doesn't he took to pay his way. Mike, our Mexican friend, he would just break out with his guitar and play here and there, when we at a cafe or on an evening. And I think that gave me ideas. As did, you do see buskers, of course. You do see other people with with music, fiddles and bring with them. And Spain is obviously a country of flamenco. Not the north though. The north is very much in sort of Celtic roots, folklore, and so there's a lot of pipe music and bagpipes and things in Galicia, especially. So I think music influenced me, and as I say, the people such morphed into a guy who I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if we have a sort of a raw talent, a flamenco guitarist who is forced to walk the Camino, but he's forced to busk it. And this is just the start of his journey to finding his way, finding his faith to be a flamenco artist. That came from the journals, the blog. Then I have the sort of mixed of my imagination and experience. I started to write about that experience in a sort of serial blog on something called Wattpad, which was around at the time. 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah,
originally came from there, and then it was so popular. Obviously, they took it down, and it was no longer self-published. It became, very successful published book. Mine wasn't quite as successful as that on Wattpad, and I don't, it's not particularly erotic book in many ways. That said, every time I put another chapter out there, I kept getting more readers.
Nice.
Maybe 40, 50 readers to begin with, and by the time I put sort of, I don't know, chapter 3 or 4 down, I was on to about 500 or 600 readers, and I thought, oh, maybe I've got something. And so I took the book down, or this sort of serial as such, and then as self-publishing was starting to take off, I discovered how you can do things in a professional way. Turned it into a novella.
Nice.
The first book, Candyfloss Guitar, and then the reviews. Some reviews, maybe about a third of reviews, people seem to want to know what was next. I thought I'd left my character where he was on the Camino, but people wanted to know what happened to him next on his journey. And so, in many ways, just as when you do walk the Camino, as I learned, arriving in Santiago, maybe the epiphany, maybe you don't have that epiphany, but it is the start of the journey. What's next? And that's what happened for my character, and that's how it turned into a sort of a fictional story, because he had more roads to walk.
Yeah.
And they were Camino roads, as it turns out. And so I researched the Camino roads, but it became a fictional sort of story, in a sense. But I think, as being inspired by travel, there will be a time when I probably write a memoir or a traditional travel lit book, non-fiction, and just sort of thinking about what I might do next, and that could, something, maybe it could be a practical guide. I'm not quite sure yet, but just once we get the marketing of the third book out of the way, we'll see. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it totally does.
Okay.
I love hearing about people's journeys, because I'm obviously, I've never published fiction, and all of my books are nonfiction. And so every time I walk a trail, I'm always like, I bring my iPad with like a little keyboard, and I'm taking notes, and and like I'm taking pictures, thinking about the cover.
Yes.
It's all in my head. So it's a very different process, and I love hearing about people's processes of combining adventures with producing a book.
I think so. Yes. I mean, when on the second and third book, knowing I now had a series, I would continue to take the notes in a sort of old-fashioned form on my notepad. I think maybe the odd note on my phone sometimes, but I would take a lot more photos.
Yeah.
Just to capture that sense of place.
Yes.
The landscape, the environment. And so I did a lot of that once I knew sort of book 2 and 3 that I wanted to, it's very much a book set in Spain and Portugal. And a sense of place. So I think it was a lot more raw to begin with the first one. But that said, it is obviously very different to nonfiction, as you suggested.
Yeah. And I find as well that taking the pictures along the way helps me remember the details for when I'm writing about it. Like oftentimes I'll just take a picture of like the trail, what it looks like. Is it rocky? Is it gravelly? Is it dirt? Is it just so I can remember when I'm describing the route later, it was, like this.
Yeah, well, I
So
think you're naturally very visual and observant anyway.
yeah,
So I remember from our walk on a Saturday, you were, you and Emma were both sort of similar, taking pictures of,
yeah,
of the
fungi.
flora and fauna. Yes, mushrooms. There's mushrooms which seem to be everywhere now. I've noticed
Yeah,
since seeing them.
yep, yep. Yeah, I am a very visual person. I don't know if I'm very good at expressing that in my writing though. I'm not one of those people that really gets into the description, and I feel like that's something that I need to work on a little bit more
Yeah,
in my
but I mean,
books.
but your books are practical in a sense as well, though,
Yes,
aren't
yes, they
they?
are.
So
They
that's,
are.
I guess there's a balance to be had there.
Mm,
Suddenly becoming all flowery
yeah.
might not be particularly sort of work and style. But have you ever? When I'm sort of, I think, well, we touched on it when we were talking about. I know I was. We were joking, calling it the podcast questions when we'd ask each other a question about our lives that we perhaps didn't know, or filling in some blanks and gaps. And you were talking quite a bit about your time in Argentina and running a hostel and Patagonia and things. And I was saying, wow, that's that. There's a lot of things which happened to you in your life there.
Yeah.
And I don't think correct me if I'm wrong, we're quite ready to write about it, sort of, in its sort of in its real sense. But
Yeah.
we did say, well, maybe that is something could be a story in a
Yeah.
fiction adapted for fiction in a
Yeah.
novel, and it'd be interesting to see if you did that at some point.
I would love to. The problem is my memory is really bad. Um, so I would need to really spend some time like digging back in the old memory archives,
Yeah.
but I would love to because especially when I lived in Mexico,
Mm.
I lived in this really rural part of Southeast Mexico that's now grown. But I met so many characters when I
I
lived
could
there, like
imagine.
just
Yeah.
wild, interesting people that did
Yes. Yeah.
quirky things, so many quirky people. And I have so many little like snippets of like encounters with people that were just really unique. And it could be funny. It could be, I mean,
Mm.
yeah, I don't know. I would really need to dig back in the archives for that. But yeah,
Do you
it's
have a lot
something
of
that's happened.
photographs from the time though? From those
No.
times? You
I
don't?
was I
Okay.
was I was working really hard,
Yeah.
really long days,
Yes.
and this was before camera phones. I mean, I moved there in 1999 and
Okay.
I left Mexico in I don't know, 2000, about the time the iPhone was coming out, but I didn't have one.
Yes.
Yeah, so it wasn't I had a camera to take pictures back then. It wasn't quite the same as it
What was
wasn't
it? A Canon
easy.
or one of the Canon sort
Yeah,
of cameras
one of
there, or
those little
sort of thing?
things that like, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
yeah, so I don't have a lot of pictures, which is unfortunate
Mm.
because
Mm.
I mean, it was that business was such a massive adventure. And like I said, I met so many like quirky people along
Mm.
the way, and it could be a great book, but yeah, memory.
Yeah, perhaps it's about just working out sort of chronologically, looking
Yeah,
at it, what happened here with the business, and that might
yeah,
spark
yeah,
memories as such. But I know what you mean in terms of the quirky people, because very much that's something on the Camino.
yeah,
There's people from all walks of life, and they intersect your way on the journey,
yes, yes,
and you can't help but share each other's stories, especially
yeah,
because when you're walking, there's not much else to do really, apart from if you're
mm,
on your own. But if
yeah,
you meet up with other people sometimes and you're walking, you share your stories, and I think it's that sort of thing of a
yeah,
stranger that you're
yeah,
very open, and everybody knows generally there's a reason
yeah.
for walking. You have a reason, and so sort of almost sort of after you sort of said your greeting of Buen Camino and where did you start the walk, it's not
Mm,
long before you sort of each person has the confidence to ask, well, what's your
mm,
reason for walking?
mm.
And then the stories come.
Which
Yeah.
is really interesting. It's very different from walking a national trail here in the UK. Like when I was walking the Ridgeway or the South Downs Way, no one asks you why you're walking it. It's just a
No.
week. You're like walking it
Yeah.
because you like
Yeah.
want to be out in nature. Like there's not like this big overarching like
Yes.
reason for walking it. So
Yes.
that's also a very different experience.
Yeah, and because on the Camino, you're meeting people who aren't typically hikers. And
Yeah.
this, I think, is where some of the concern
Yes.
comes in. It's like, could I walk all that distance? How
Yeah.
fit do I have to be? How much weight can I carry?
Yeah.
What's the accommodation along the way? Because you're not carrying, your tent, as we
Yeah.
touched on earlier. You're not carrying all your food.
Yeah.
You might have your packed lunch for the day or something,
Yeah.
but you're going to eat because there's the pilgrim menus, which are
Mm.
subsidized menus that you as a pilgrim, because you have your pilgrim passport,
Mm.
you can eat for €7 or €8, typically.
A big meal.
Yes, a big meal, which a starter, a main meal, and a
Mm.
dessert, and often wine,
Yeah.
and so that that I think is a different experience. That said, you will meet some people who just love hiking and
Mm.
they want to walk the Camino because just for the outdoor experience, for the testing themselves as their fitness and things. But I think, yeah, it's different because the other walks are sort of almost like you've got to be, and I don't think you need to be. It's that sort of the other way around. Is, oh, just because you're an outdoors person or a hiker, you're not going to walk, I don't know, 100 miles of the South Downs way, etc. Because there are for example, that one, there are choices. You don't really have to camp. You can stay in
Mm. B&Bs.
B&Bs, yeah. Which I've done part of it and did that overnight once. So but yes, it is different. You are absolutely right. You will, well, people will talk in a different in a different thing because, yeah,
Mm.
ultimately, whilst it's I would say it's a very long walk
Yeah.
in your mindset as opposed to a hike, and the very, very long walk is for pilgrimage reasons.
Mm. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Pilgrimage is different than just doing a trail.
Yeah, it's yeah, you're yeah. I mean, of course, in a religious pilgrimage, you're walking
Mm.
it for your religious faith.
Yeah.
To see to arrive at the remains of Saint James, who was the Muslim slayer, you know
Mm.
and in medieval times, of course, the height of pilgrimage, about 1 million people a year walked the Camino de
Yeah.
Santiago. So that, and it still is the biggest pilgrimage in terms of Christian pilgrimages,
Mm.
um, the second biggest one before Rome. So
Mm. Oh, really?
it's still, a lot of people still walk it as a religious pilgrimage.
Mm.
Yeah.
So you've got a new book coming out, which is the third in the series. Um, what's that about? What's that? What's going on
You
there?
mean
When is
this
it live?
book? Well, here's the
Oh,
sample one.
there it
So
is. How
that's why there's a
exciting.
stripe across of it, because it comes
Yeah.
out at the end of the month. So this is
Nice.
the sort of yeah, the not for resale sample
Yep.
um book. So yeah, Diego's guitar.
Nice.
That is the concluding story of this Reluctant Pilgrim trilogy. That I've mentioned, and it's 10 years later than
Mm.
the last book, and my character, without spoiling too much, thinks he's got to where he wants to be, but he still has one final road to walk when
Ooh.
he's at a point of questioning and crisis. And as I was saying, I think once you start a pilgrimage and the Camino, it just has a habit of sort of coming into your life just when you need to go for a long walk and work
Yeah.
some things out, and the magic of it, to work on you. And yeah, he's performing in a concert in Portugal and Porto, and the Camino reaches out to him. So
Mm.
it's his concluding story of yeah of what do I say on the blurb? Yeah, that'd be a lot easier there.
What is this book about? I'm
Yes, yeah, this book I've written, yes. So it's yeah, but I think, yeah, it's a culmination of his first two
nice.
of his Santiago journeys, and where he finding his place in life finally.
Mm. So is this the final book in the series, or will there be more? What's next?
Ah, well, I think I'm going to move on. Yes, unless uh, I mean, it is left. There could be if I wanted to, but I think we're going to leave it at a trilogy. But never
Yeah.
say never say. It's a trilogy for the moment. I think
Good
I
thing.
have other ideas. There's other things I want to explore. As I said, I don't quite know what they are, but I think it might
Mm.
be nonfiction next.
Mm.
As someone who's whilst I've walked 4 different Caminos, which is about 1,500 kilometers in total of different
Yes.
Caminos. I've traveled quite a bit in between
Yeah.
and before, so I've got travel stories or different things to explore. So,
Mm.
and it might be something about my past experiences, but
Mm.
on a non-fiction basis. So maybe I'll be talking to you for from tips how to arrange that.
I'm happy to help.
Thank
And
you.
what about the adventure plans? Do you have any new adventures coming up? You've got a van. Tell us about your van. I
A
know we just
van,
talked about that, but
yes,
tell me you have a van. That's so
we do
exciting.
have a van. Yes, so Emma, my partner, and I have been talking about it for ages about getting a van, um, and of course, vanning got very popular when
Mm.
we were at this sort of stay-at-home period, or
Mm.
it was more difficult that even when travel reopened, it was some places were still
Mm.
difficult to go to because everybody was at a different stage of COVID. And so, what was the term? Staycations. That's it. They became very
Yeah.
popular. I think in the UK and places like the States and other countries. So finally, we decided this must be the time to get the van. So we got a Toyota Hiace, which has
Mm.
been converted inside by a lady from Wales who was a carpenter. It's all sort
Mm.
of upcycled wood, and it's really nice. And yeah, so and we sold up in London last year and had the van, and so that was our temporary
Nice.
home, and we would set off up to Scotland first, thinking that maybe Scotland might, to explore Scotland because Emma's
Yeah.
originally from Scotland and Edinburgh, so to see some of her family, but also
Mm.
to get out into the wilds of Scotland and one or two of the islands and explore, thinking maybe that could be a place for us, a home,
Mhm.
more rural. So we travelled around part of Scotland up to Northumberland coast to begin with, and up
Mm.
and to the lowlands and the borders, Edinburgh in the van,
Nice.
Cairngorms, and then over to the west coast and the Highlands up to Skye. So that was a great experience. Um, haven't quite found we didn't find our home there as such, but it was an interesting experience as well. Being 24/7 in the van with your partner, but we got through that, so that was quite good. And it's not one of these big RVs, a massive van.
Yeah.
It's sort of VW size, but once we've got a table in there, we can cook, we can
Mm.
work and write.
You look like you eat
With
really well in the van too. I mean, I follow your adventures on Instagram, and every time I see you like cooking pasta or making coffee, I don't know, it just looks like you're
we
always
keep
like eating well.
yeah, well, we keep it fairly simple. A lot of pasta dishes, yes, and and things. And it's just we don't have like sort of a built-in grill or some of these things.
Mm.
It's just
Hot plate.
camping stove, two hobs,
Mm.
with little camping gas. But it's surprising what you can do with two
Mm.
hobs. I mean, obviously we've got a sink and things there. We can chop things up on the side, but we
Yeah.
also cook on the back of the van often.
Ah, yeah.
And we have like a shelf that flips back so you can
Nice.
cook on the back and just literally take, because it's a portable stove.
Yeah.
It's been designed to slot in the sort of the kitchen area, but you can just
Yeah.
pull it out, take the little gas canisters with you, typical camping gas
Mm.
canister that you'll know about, and then just cook on the back of the van there. But yeah, it's surprising that there's a lot of you can cook quite a lot with a frying pan or a saucepan
Yeah.
and things. So yeah, I think we did eat well. And one of the great things about sort of getting into rural Scotland is a lot of farm shops. So
Yeah.
we have fish sometimes, and
Nice.
popped into the farm shops and things, and found some nice things. Simply just from eggs to
Yeah.
some nice sort of things like, I don't know, um you know um organic burgers and things like
Mm.
that,
Yeah.
where where they've come from, and that sort of that traceability, because it's from the farm
Mm.
often. So yeah, we ate well, and sort of found our routine of being in the van, etc., and shared the driving. So it was a great experience. And so that experience, then that sort of built up our confidence, you might say.
Yeah.
Although we had gone down to Devon and Cornwall for sort of a long weekend
Yes.
before that, built up our confidence to drive across France.
Mm.
Um, across the border there into Genoa, to northern Italy, and we took the ferry from Genoa, which is a 24-hour ferry, 22 hours, so nearly a full day on the ferry.
Wow.
So we didn't want to drive all the way down the spine of Italy. That it was also time as well, because we were coming by then. It was sort of September, and summer was getting away from us. So we took the ferry down to Sicily. And explored Sicily for about 6 weeks in the van.
Nice.
But for a week, we helped. It was the olive season. Then, so sort of into where are we now? Sort of end of September. Picking olives and local olive farming with some friends of Emma's who a friend of hers married an Italian man whose family has an olive plantation. So literally picking olives when they're ready to pick, and then taking them to the local olive mill and seeing them turn into olive oil on the very same day. So that was a nice experience. So yes, the van was great to take us around Sicily. So yes, so we've got the van now. So that's sort of another dynamic to our travels. And yeah, it's a nice little writing space actually as well. So but obviously you don't always have Wi-Fi and things. So I think that's a nice way just to sort of write raw, and just get some ideas down. But of course you've got your phone if you need to send emails and things, and connect to that to your phone. Nice. So yes, another way to travel. And we have never, both of us, we've done a lot of traveling between us, but we'd never sort of. And Emma has traveled in she's traveled in different forms of transport, including a vehicle, which is another story of hers when she as you know about in the Balkans,
which has been on the podcast.
Yeah, she has been on the podcast. So her trip around the Balkans, but neither of us had ever traveled in that way in a van. A small sort of van. So so that's another element to our travels now.
Good. Right, so I will link to all of your links in the description. Now, now I can do that. You can't do that on a podcast.
No, you can't. When you can't hold your book up and not be,
exactly. Look, what
be
a nice
completely
cover.
unsubtle about it. And,
the gorgeous cover. So, like I said, I'll link to all your stuff. But tell us, where can people find you online and learn more about what you do? And what is the date that your book is going live?
Okay, so the book is going live on the 30th of March.
Okay.
This year. And this year, 3rd of March, just in case if we get to put this podcast out or something. It was 2023.
Yes.
Podcast. I've got the habit of saying podcast. Video.
Yeah.
So yes, Diego's Guitar, 30th of March. Probably the best place to find out about me is just my website, which is Stephen with a PH. So www.stephen. Stephen Marriott, RRT for Marriott.com. So StephenRMarriott.com. And I'm in the Reluctant Pilgrim series is available on, you can find it on Amazon, or you can look it up, online at your favorite bookstore, etc. They're available there. And as well with the third book, at the end of March, it's available for pre-order at the moment.
How exciting. And I checked it out this morning because I was looking for the link, and it's #1 under religious travel.
That's very good. You've done your research well. Yes. Because I only found that out this morning as well. When I thought, oh gosh, yes, I'm number one.
So,
and this is quite a small category, but it's nice because it's it is very much niche. It's niche, and it is a pilgrimage, which is religious travel for some people. So that's nice to just see that as a a bestseller in that category for a new book. So nice. But I'm not going to sign off here and not push you on what you're doing next, because I know, things have, as you explained in your last sort of, when you put your podcast on pause, that there's a lot of different things going on, and I know we touched about it a little bit when we were walking, but I'm also keen to know what's happening with you in the creative world of.
I don't know. I have been, last year was just like a non-creative year. Like I did some blog stuff, and I'm always kind of like touching up old blog posts and things like that.
Yeah.
I really like doing that. I love like tweaking old posts and adding stuff to them. But I hadn't done a big project like a book. Last year was the first year that I didn't publish a book in a long time. So I'm feeling kind of creatively like dry. I don't know. I walked the coast to coast last year in May,
I mean, that was something we talked about, actually,
and
wasn't
that's
it?
going to be a book. I've got it set up, and I've got all my notes typed up. They're all set up in Scrivener. I've kind of started editing them, but I'm kind of stuck on that just because that's my first adventure that I did with other people.
Okay.
So like when I do an adventure on my own and I write about it, it's my thing. Like I'm telling my story. But when there are other people involved, like I'm very concerned about being sensitive to their experience as well. So it's like,
Yeah.
do I just not talk about the other people? Do I write about my stuff but not talk about I don't know. Like I'm still kind of figuring that out. So I think that's kind of the thing that's kept me stuck. And also, I have this kind of habit of walking trails twice and doing a book about the two different
Yes.
adventures. So
Yes.
like South Dunn's Way I've done twice, all the trails I've done at least twice. And I like sharing that comparison of the two journeys in the book. Like the first time I walked it, I made all these mistakes, and then I fixed the mistakes in the second one, which is so much better. So, and I really want to do the coast to coast again, but alone. So I don't know. Maybe I'll do that this year in September, maybe. And then work on the book. I don't know. That should be my next book. I'm also in the middle of working on my second tree book, which would be kind of the follow-up to If Trees Could Talk.
Yeah.
And because everyone's asking me for a book on how to talk to trees. And for the longest time I was like, how do I do that? And then I realized that it needs to come from the trees. And so I started like asking the trees questions and channeling their answers. So it's going to be very much kind of tree led. And I have a better structure for it now. I've been working on that book. I've been working on that book for the last 3 years. So that's also kind of in process. So we'll see.
So the inkwell is not quite dry yet, then?
No, it's not quite dry. It's just delayed.
Percolating. Okay, delayed.
It's percolating. Yes, it's been on the back burner.
Yeah. Well, and again, actually talking of fictional books, and I like the idea you're saying about comparing, perhaps walking with a group of the coast to coast and then doing that solo if you do that solo. But obviously being sensitive to the people that you walked with the first one, maybe that could be a fictional book.
Yeah, I know. I think that is a good idea. It could be. It could be. Yeah. But I'm just very concerned about maintaining other people's privacy.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of weird. I mean, it's kind of weird to like be on an adventure with someone else when you know they're going to be writing a book about it. Like, I just want to be sensitive to the fact that other people might not want to be famous in a book.
Yes. Or I guess maybe it's walking solo. Then you can just reflect the one book and reflect on when you did it.
Yeah.
And the mistakes and how you've learned from that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yes, I look forward to. There's quite a lot of potential stuff there, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. The thing is, I have so many ideas. I have like a Evernote file of like all my book ideas. I have so many things. It's just a matter of having the kind of the headspace to work on it.
Yeah.
There's no lack of ideas. It's just I need to like get settled.
Okay. Wow.
So thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to talk to you as always. And I cannot wait for your book to come out in March, at the end of March, 30th.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you got me talking. I just remembered I had a glass of water here, but
me too.
I haven't paused to breathe. But yes, I'll now take a sip of water.
Good plan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.